Hmong-ish is a podcast produced by Hmong American Media located in Sacramento, California, and sponsored by Hmong Organizing for Progress Empowerment Center, or the Hope Center, and Culture Through Cloth, also in Sacramento. I'm your host, Pachia.
And I'm your host, Shoun.
And we are Hmong-ish. So Hmong-ish is a podcast where Shoun and I share our thoughts on anything and all things Hmong, diving into some of our own experiences on what it means to be Hmong American and Hmong in today's time. So what are we talking about today, Shoun?
We're going to talk about, being Hmong under the influence of colonialism, or understanding Hmong under the influence of colonialism. So what is colonialism? Colonialism is defined as control of one power over a dependent area or people. It occurs when one nation subjugates another, conquering its population, exploiting it, often enforcing its own language and cultural values upon those people. When the Hmong arrived in Laos in the mid-1800s, many European countries were already fighting to colonize Asia, especially Southeast Asia was this time called Indochina or Indochina, and that consists of Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam, and mostly Burma, Myanmar today was colonized by the British. However, the other countries were colonized by the French.
So Indochina is kind of a Chinese term that transferred over to Western terminology? Would you say, or not really?
I think it's a Western term.
Okay.
Because they knew China, and then they found south of China. So they call it
So we're part, yeah. So they considered us the part between India and China.
Yes.
Therefore, Indochina.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, Thailand, apparently people don't understand, but Thailand was the only nation was to ever remain independent from colonization. And so, that's why we get the
and
Thailand
retain
today.
their monarchy, too.
Yeah,
They still have their monarchy today.
So that's why they're an economic power in the region today in that area, because they've always maintained their independence.
That is a crazy comparison to make, actually. Very,
because you look at Burma, telling. You look at Burma was Myanmar now. Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, they are nowhere.
And they were all their own kingdoms back in the day.
And multiple kingdoms, you know. And so they're nowhere close to what Thailand is today. Thailand's an economic power in that area. And, the best spot to tour and vacation, right? What was our experience like under colonialism? I think we could pinpoint to one historical event that was very impactful for the Hmong community or the Hmong in this area. It was the Paj Cai Rebellion, right? Or the Paj Cai Rebellion. Okay. The French heavily documented this. It started in 1918. Paj Cai lived along...
So it wasn't too long ago.
Yeah, it wasn't too long ago. Only 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Paj Cai lived along the border of Laos and Vietnam.
Okay.
I think according to the French, he was living in the Dien Bien area.
Okay. 1 second. So take us back. What's happening in the climate at this time?
So 1917, 1918 is World War I, right? And, the French colonial system set up. They've already had a governing system for the the area there, but they're still trying to figure out how to effectively manage the system. And so they appointed local tax collectors, right, or local administrative heads, and they started this system called the Kietong system, right? In Laos, they appointed a Hmong Kietong, and in Vietnam, there is the Thai administrative in the Sapa Lo Chai area to Dien Bien, right? And he was
Thai government was in that area.
Thai, no, he was a Thai.
Oh, like the Thai.
Okay. Yeah. So we call them
the Thai ethnic,
the Black Thai.
Yeah, the Black Thai ethnic group. Okay.
They were the head administrator of that area, and the majority was Hmong and Thai. But then, because of heavy taxation and corruption, then Paj Cai rebelled, right?
Who was he to people? Was he just a regular guy, or was he kind of like a leader already in his own right?
Paj Cai was young. I think he rebelled in his early 20s only. So he was young. Paj Cai, the French called it the Madman's War because Hmong people
we're always described in history as the crazy savages going against colonies.
Well,
not colonies, but
we have this tendency to believe that heaven or spirits or ancestral gave us, we had a vision or an awakening, I would guess, and then it would allow us to defeat whoever. And then Paj Cai had sorts of similar experiences, I believe, and then he yeah, so he rebelled. And, long story short, he lost in Vietnam, and then he fled to Laos, and eventually, the Hmong in Laos who held power turned him into the French, and he died. And so that stopped the rebellion. And then the French says, okay, the Hmong people is unhappy, and they're going to rebel. So let's give them power, because, we gave the Laotians power, and we saw what happened, corruption and all that, and okay, let's appease them. So that's when, we saw the rise of the most well-known Kiet Tong we had, right? Kiet Tong Lam Yo. And, people all say, oh, who is Kiet Tong Lam Yo? And we're like, he's one of the leaders under the French, and, he brought so much, like, he was a good leader. That's why a lot of Hmong people today say that, oh, Kiet Tong Lam Yo, and then they say Kiet Tong Lam Yo, Tumbi Li Phong. And then Year of Pound, right? Kiet Tong Lam Yo was appointed Kiet Tong, 1920, 1921, right after the rebellion. After Paj Cai died, right? Coincidence? And then he, brought a lot of change to the people of Laos. Like, we started participating in parliament. Tumbi Li Phong went to school, came back. He became, long story short, you guys could go check it out. But then he became part of parliament, or part of the political system. And that's where Hmong people began to get integrated. But it's all part of the French colonial policy to appease the Hmong people. And, and it gave...
By putting these individuals in power? Or
Yeah, by putting these people in power and making them the administrative head. So you would collect taxes.
Were we the minorities in these areas?
Yeah, we were minorities in the area.
Okay.
And so... majority, but in Laos we were the minority. But
overall in the country,
yeah,
but maybe we were the majority
in
within
those
these regions.
Because they came to a realization that, okay, and they're going to rebel.
So,
they're going to rebel, and it's going to be, costly.
I kind of want to go back to your story about the Paj Cai Rebellion, right? So why do you think that this is significant to Hmong being under the influence of colonialism? What's the connection?
I think it's interesting because, I think colonialism and that reshapes all our understanding of history to modern day, because there's always a thing one of my friend who passed away, Dr. Kuyen, he always tell me Sean, you have to go beyond the refugee, go beyond learning our history.
Our refugee story,
right? Our
yes.
refugee story.
Our history, yeah.
Because
there's so much that's happened that's contributed to we are today.
I'm so conflicted about this because, one, I say I'm a refugee, and I repeat that refugee narrative, right? Well, the Hmong people, we are loyal to Americans. We love freedom. We fought for the Americans, and when we left Laos, all of us died, right? That's the narrative. All of us died. We were persecuted. Yes, we were persecuted, and all of us left Laos, and the majority of Hmong people is in the West now. Well, that's a lie because there's 800,000 Hmong people in the house right now, and there's 1 million in Vietnam.
But you can argue, yeah, and I mean, with the refugee story, you can also argue it's a story we feel that we have to tell to almost justify ourselves being here.
Americans, right?
Being American, it's a type of model minority story we have to tell. It's not that it didn't happen, but it's almost like we have to keep telling it to justify why we're here.
Yeah. Then you get in America and you see race relations, race hegemony. People like to call it white hegemony or white supremacy. I said race hegemony because white's on top, and then it goes down to different color lines. Yeah, and it all leads to colonialism, imperialism. It all draws similar. It all has that similar influence on all of us. When the Hmong were colonized, we had a lot of advancement into our culture, society. I think in Laos we were very poor. We weren't being effectively administrative relevant to the Lao government or Lao kingdom there until the French was there. They set up they set up counties, they set up administrations, and we were giving healthcare. To a certain point, we're giving schools, our leaders there who were serving under the French were able to provide a school system for us. And, it was something that was provided to us that was never given to us, right? But looking in hindsight, knowing what you know now, it was only appeasement. They only did it because they needed to exploit us. And the only way to exploit us was to give us something, right? Like, they weren't looking for our autonomy. They were looking for our best interests. They were using us to grow opium. You know, we were part of the drug trade. And that was the only thing that we could have used to pay taxes, you know, and, you know, you got to do what you got to do to get by, right? And I struggle with this every day, right? Because, like, I can't criticize that, oh, you know, Hmong people, we were idiots for growing opium. We weren't, because we had to survive. If we didn't grow opiums, then we would be giving up our children. Like, there's stories about Hmong people who couldn't pay taxes and they had to sell off their kids.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and indentured servants, right?
Yeah.
And all that. And so, you know, there are really real stories like that exist. And, you know, many of the elders, they can explain it. So you got to understand that, you know, at that time, it was the only thing that they could do to survive. But then you realize in the context of colonialism, then it's horrible, because they're exploiting us to grow opium for them to do whatever they need to do in Southeast Asia and the world, you know. But, you know, I think the good thing about colonialism that I could ultimately point to, in my opinion, my perspective only, is that, you know, because of our involvement with the French, and we're here in the U.S. today, you know, and the United States, we are not called Miao anymore, right? Miao or Miaozi. In Chinese, they still use the term Miaozi, which is very, you know, that's a different perspective on the issue. But then, and Laos and Thailand, when we were called Miao, it was derogatory, because in Lao and Thai, Miao would be like wildcats, you know. And
so why is it that, you know, the Hmong here in the U.S. remember Miao being negative, whereas some of the Hmong in China, like, are more accepting of the term Miao? And what are those differences? And how do you think colonialism impacts that change? Because there is that difference. Like, some people are okay with it and embrace it, and others are like, no.
I think in China, Miao is an umbrella term. Miaozu is an umbrella term for three different types of language Hmong people, right? Or Miao people.
Yeah, so Eastern, Central, Western.
Eastern, Central, Western. All Hmong are Miao, but not all Miao are Hmong. We are united through our cultural practice, our marriage practices, our funeral practices, and our songs, like our ritual songs. That's how we're united. Language-wise, you know, it could be intelligible from 20% to 80% to none at all, depending on how long the area has been separated, right? So that's why the umbrella term Miao is widely accepted, because, you know, in the Eastern dialect, they call themselves the Xiong, or Xiong. Kind of sounds like Hmong too, right?
Yeah.
Xiong. And then in the Central dialect, they call themselves the Mu, right? HMUB, Mu. And then they also call themselves Ganao, which is like totally different. That's the Central. And the Western dialect, which is us, right? We call ourselves Hmong. And there's a different group who call themselves Amao, right? And most of the Amao are called Amao because they are heavily influenced by Christianity. So these were the Samuel Pollard Hmong. Samuel Pollard was a 18th century
Anthropologist,
missionary,
yeah, who was like documenting a lot of the the travels, and
he felt really compelled to help the Miao in China, or the Hmong in China, because he was Scottish, and, you know, he was just so sad that we don't have a written language, and, you know, being Scottish and being colonized by British, you know, he even said it, like the Britons or the English. They lost Gaelic. You know, Gaelic was the language in Scotland that was lost, and they're always trying to revive it. And so when he met the Hmong people, he was just so compelled to help them, and he actually created a Pollard script for them. And
so, that's interesting. Yeah. I've never seen that.
Yeah, so there's also the Pollard script for the Miao there. But back to the question, right? So that's why the Miao in China accepts the term Miao, because it's an umbrella term for three different subgroups. And then within the Western Hmong, you know, we only know Hmong Hmong Dao. Within colonialism, our history is changed too. Like, you get missionaries who goes out, and what do you think? Like, we have missionaries who goes and created scripts for us, like the Pollard script. We have the Hmong RPA system. You go and read a lot of Hmong missionary and their anthropology work towards the Hmong people. It was through a colonial lens, because they wanted to convert us to Christianity and change how our views of the world. And then, it's in our history too, because they would write these books that says, "Oh, we're the last tribe of Israel," like our creation stories, right? God Yen Ong is Adam and Eve. I think there's one.
Yeah, but see, these are like problematic in many ways, right? In my opinion.
How is it problematic?
Well, it's problematic because it tries to reshape our own understanding, our own stories, how we understand ourselves to fitting into their narratives, to say, oh, actually, like, you're probably one of our last tribes, kind of thing. And I mean, I think that, like, stories in general throughout time have a lot of similarities. Like, human stories and myths have a lot of similarities. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with looking at that. But if we're talking about this in terms of like colonialism and who we are and our beliefs are somehow taken to like fit the narratives of people who are colonizing us, to be like, actually, like, you fit this, then I think that can be a little problematic because it erases our own history.
Right? Yeah,
it erases our own history. Yeah.
It
erases the way we understand ourselves. Yeah.
Where we come from, we might reshape. We might be thinking we come from Israel, like, the Tower of Babel fell, and then we moved to China.
But in many ways, these are ways that then, people can convince. I don't think there's anything wrong with, like, like converting to Christianity, but were these tools also to help people feel more comfortable converting into Christianity? Like, I
think they were, there were more tools to say that, hey, you and I, we have a relationship, right? Because you have to build a relationship with the people, and by understanding their stories and reframing the perspective of saying, hey, my story of my people is similar to your story of your people. Maybe we are one people, and
that's the thing is, like, that's not, but that's where it gets complicated. Like, is colonialism good or bad? Because those aren't necessarily bad things to like want to be connected to other people. Like I was saying, like, Christianity isn't necessarily bad.
Christianity's
like,
not bad at all.
so like, it's not me trying to like make something black and white, but it's just me trying to understand more, like, the stuff that's happened, that's left an impact.
And I think that's a tool to understanding the mind too, because you see, like, during the Paj Cai Rebellion, right, going to Christianity, there is a person that Hmong people calls nowadays Hutu Chi King Tana, right?
Uh-huh.
They say he was a white dude who came and helped stop the rebellion, or helped quell the Hmong people not to rebel anymore, right?
Uh-huh.
And that was a French missionary called I think it's Yves Betray. He was assigned to Tonkin as a missionary. And then he worked with a lot of the Hmong there. And then he was transferred by 1917, he was already in Yunnan with the Hmong there. And then when Pach Cai Rebellion broke out, right, the French knew that he knew how to speak Hmong and he had a good relationship. And so they commissioned him to come back to Laos and Vietnam to talk to the Hmong people, to gather information. Mm-hmm. So literally, he was sort of, people get mad at me if I say this. I don't know if it's true or not, but from my thinking, he was like a spy. He was there to gather information and give it to the French intelligence, and he would write reports like, this is what the Hmong's thinking. This is what the Hmong feels about the war. This is all that.
Interesting.
And he would write classified reports. I think he had like a classified report right now that you could try to look up, but it just talk about his views on the war and what needs to be done to change the political climate. Why is he choosing to talk? Because eventually, because of his interaction, the war stopped, right? Because people don't want to live in war. People want to live in peace. He wrote a lot of like anthropology, like a lot of books from an anthropological perspective about Hmong people, and it's like, it's something that we had that we don't have.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point that like he can be seen as a spy because in many ways, like, I come from anthropology, right? But in many ways, early anthropology, that's what it really was. Like, go in and learn about the people so we can understand them more to colonize them.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, and then eventually, like, the person who wrote it, they're not saying they're colonizing it, but there's powers that be that
That's what it's
uses
being
their
used
word
for. Yeah.
to understand the people and colonize them.
Yeah.
You know, and so eventually you're being used as a tool to for a higher power, like for the colonizer. Yeah, and so you know, what are the lasting impacts of colonialism? You know, in our community. You know, I think in the Hmong community, I think it's profound because me working in the community nowadays and working with a lot of Hmong elders, you would talk to them and like the perspective that they talk to you would be from like, oh, we are from Đông Đảo Đông Chữ, and we're like, okay, from Đông Đảo Đông Chữ, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, you know, Thảo Y, your great grandpa was a Tossing,
Yeah.
or he was this under this person.
Yeah.
And then you're like, there's just one story I know, and they're like, oh, one of your grandpa was a Tossing, right? And you know how he became a Tossing? So one of your other grandpa was a Tossing in this town, and so he went to the other town, and it's one basing. So he had to get everybody's registration and take it to his stand to get the title to Tossing.
Wow.
I was like, isn't that corruption already?
How did he
Yeah.
convince people to do that?
You just make it up and just get your friend and you get a title.
Jeez.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, corruption was rampant, and that's just corruption. But you know, that was still under the colonial system, I guess. And you know, like a lot of Hmong people still, you know, allude to like the Tossing system, the Kiatong system.
But that begs the question, like, what kind of systems are we upholding?
Right? Like you
Within our community.
Yeah.
If that's what we're kind of alluding to, like, well, my family comes from this.
Yeah, and that's a lot of things. Like if you talk to a lot of the elders, not the younger folks. I think folks in the 40s they don't really care mind anymore. But I think a lot of the folks in their late 50s to 60s to 70s, they still kind of matters to them. And you know, like I was at a fundraiser, right? And it happens multiple times, and you know, the title of city council, right? And so the title of city council, one of the Hmong elders alluded to that. This title is comparable to a Tossing's position. And you're
the
like...
title city council member?
And I was like, wait, city council, you're elected by the people.
Tossing, you're appointed.
And Tossing, you're appointed to overwatch some people. So it's like, it's a colonial term being applied in modern times for
to like a democratic process.
Yeah, so how do we even compare and contrast it, or do we even use that term?
Yeah,
now?
do we even use that term?
Or do we?
And is that a French term or is that a Lao term or like Tossing na?
I don't know.
That's interesting.
So
I don't know the linguistics of that.
Tossing and Kietong. You know, Kietong.
Kietong doesn't, like, neither of those sound French.
Yeah, Kietong really is similar to the Chinese Canton system.
Oh.
Yeah, the Chinese have a system called the Canton system where they have like certain heads, but it might be the French borrowing from the Chinese on how to colonize the people. You know, like powers borrow from powers and the ideas to colonize the people, you know. And that's where they get it from. And then, you know, I think Christianity, that's a big thing in the Hmong community.
I think it's interesting, right? Because I think when you talk about colonialism and even just, for me, having a more radical education, I would say, like, Christianity is often shaped as, like, the big bad evil. And I think it's interesting. I met, you know, one of my friends, and she's Christian, and she just talks about, well, what about all of the good that's come out of Christianity and missionary work, like the RPA language system. Christianity's helped a lot of Hmong families. Like, for example, my partner, like his mom's found community in Christian churches because, you know, she was divorced, and so it was harder for her to find community in Hmong family, you know, like very traditional families. And so, like, Hmong divorcees, if you want to call them that, like, find more community in, like, Christian churches.
I think that's a modern implication of Christianity nowadays, like how
that
how
is
helps.
So,
and it also has the same implications in the past too. Like I know, you know, a lot of Christian missionaries in the past, they provided dental care to poor villages. Most of the Hmong people in Laos who live in the most who suffer the most poverty heavily converted to Christianity, because when they came in, you know, they provided healthcare. Like for example, right, I heard stories, you know, like how this community was outcast because Lamochuana, right, and it was the missionaries who went and saved them, you know, because they brought healthcare, you know, and they were able to go and, you know, eventually influence them. I have Tao cousins who are heavily part of who are Christianity now, and I think one of my uncles, he just sent me a photo the other day of one of my distant grandpas, and he's in a museum in France. His photos there with a whole like the Hmong Christian community.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're like, yeah, Christianity did provide a lot of opportunities of like healthcare and system, but that's the thing that comes with the West. With colonialism, they bring their technology and they give it to the people.
So I think I know we also wanted to talk a little bit like about how to decolonize our minds, and I think it's interesting because I recently read an article about how decolonization is not a metaphor. Did I share that with you?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
I think you did.
And I, because I read that article, it's just really changed my mind on how we talk about decolonialism. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it plays an important part because I feel like decolonization, right? What's colonization? Colonization is, a nation or a certain perspective or a certain country, and you use it to exploit people, right? Or change their perspective so it fits your narrative, right? And that's exploitation. Like, how do we decolonize our mind? Like, how do we understand these concepts? Decolonizing the mind means deconstructing the thoughts, preferences, values that derive from a colonial way of thinking. And, this is a process that eventually leads to more fundamental questions, right? So why is it important to decolonize? I think by interrogating the biases and assumptions that underpins current education arrangement, the decolonization process opens education up to reflecting alternative knowledge systems, philosophies, and perspective, right? Because of colonization, we are meant to talk a certain way. We are meant to think that the West or perspective of one nation is the best, and it leads. It's a one-way narrative, and so by decolonizing, we open up to saying, other cultures, other influences, maybe their perspective is similar or their perspective is the same, and so I think you're able to grow more, and I think certain terms like decolonization. When I was growing up, I used to always refer to Laos as a third world country. Like I would say third world country this, third world country that. And then you realize, wait, third world country's a colonization term. It's already pitted like I'm a first world country. I'm first. You're a third world country, so it's already first and third. So it's already a hierarchy, right? So, to decolonize my mind, I say the U.S. is a developed country. Laos is a developing country. Decolonizing our mind and using certain words in academia, intellectually, it really helps reshape perspectives and views and negative connotations of certain countries. Because, right off the bat, when you think about third world country, what do you think? You think no shoes, huts, you think, no electricity, and, first world, and you're like, okay, like tall buildings, downtown cities. I mean, like from our travel experience, right? You go to Laos, Vientiane, it's pretty modern now.
I've noticed that a lot, actually, where a lot of Hmong Americans have this perception of what life is like in Laos or in Thailand, not just based off of what we actually know, but based off of the idea as those countries being third world countries.
Yeah. And, that plays a part in the 90s, right? We used to call me a Hmong type.
Yeah, MTT.
Right? And, when we were kids, we didn't want to be friends with all the Hmong that were Hmong type.
Yeah, because we want to be cool. We don't want to be uncool. Cool. And it's just, but I mean, these are all the like very like subtle ways that I think colonialism affects us.
Right, that
and our own our own perspective, our own perception of like who we are. We don't want to be Hmong in some way because it's not Mika enough.
This doesn't fit the narrative of being Mika, being modernized. And so how do we decolonize ourselves to or reshape the perspective?
And I think a big part of that is really just learning how to value who we are, the way that not just our own history, but the way we understand and look at the world, right? It's like, why does our history only matter if we have books from like 200-300 years ago that document it? Why are our oral stories not enough evidence? And we've kind of talked about this where sometimes I'll read academic papers And the way that Hmong history or Hmong thought is talked about by scholars, I feel is just so inherently racist. And
Right.
because the way they talk is like, oh, like, I don't know, it's just the way they position our oral history to
And
be
these are liberal
to be
scholars too.
yes they
Progressive
are
liberal
yeah
scholars.
but it's like it's like, you know, it's like it's not real. It's like, oh well,
It's dismissed.
it's dismissed in many, like, I
Yeah.
can't think of the actual wording right at this moment,
Yeah.
but it's just written in a way where it dismisses the authority or the legitimacy of the claims as if it's not real because it wasn't written, or it's not real because, you know, like it's just kind of, it's hearsay. But if it's not true, then why do we have this shared history that over like a million of us like refer to and can claim some type of connection to?
Because of the frustration of what Pachia said, you know, and I was like, I'm going to travel. And so that's why, you know, it sparked my interest in traveling to China, Southeast Asia, and to see people in places, right? And then you meet people in places and you meet people from these regions and you interact with them and then you understand that, hey, you know, I read this and this said that this area is this and it doesn't make sense. But then you realize there's Hmong people here. They say they've been here for 800 years. So, like China, right? When I was in Zhongyi County, Zhongyi County is where they held the conference, People's Conference, where Mao Zedong took the head of the Communist Party, right?
Uh-huh.
And then in Zhongyi, there is a lot of Hmong villages there. Hmong. They are Hmong. And I was like, wait, did we play a role within the Long March and helping the CCP escape the KMT, you know, during the Civil War? And I asked that to the Hmong people in there, and they say, yes, we did. But in college, when I asked, right, because I was so excited, I was like, hey, I want to learn more, or where do you find works about the minorities' impact on the Long March? Because they were in Guizhou, and I knew there were Hmong people in Guizhou, and my professor would say, oh, they didn't play an important role. Like literally, they didn't play an important role. This is, or I guess they come from a mindset already saying that the Miao are Chinese, and so it's all Chinese. So when you ask like minority, they can't pinpoint who it was because they just go off of what Chinese said. But like if you go deep into it and you realize, I was like, wait, we did. They're like, oh yeah, the Hmong people, we helped them navigate the rivers, we helped them cross that.
My goodness.
We even signed up to be part of the army. And you're like, wow, like by being there and talking to these people, you're like, okay, we need to reinterpret history, rewrite it. This is a different
It's
perspective
true.
that you've never seen unless you've been there and visit. And you know, a lot of people don't have the means to travel, so it's really really tough when you're getting sources from a certain perspective and
Sure.
it's seen a certain way. But then you know, that's how we decolonize our mind, is to say this. Not everything written in academia might be true.
Oh, no.
But
Many
it doesn't.
things are not.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that the person who
Not
wrote
that it's
it.
not true, but maybe like just because you write doesn't mean
Yeah, you believe in it too. You're only pointing. So when you're and I think when they're writing in academia, right, you're getting a certain amount of facts and you rationalize it and then you analyze it and then you tell it in the way that's most rational, right? So if you were to gain more facts and more sources and more stuff, then you could amend your argument. You could change
Yeah.
your perspective. You know.
And you know, like things are written not to be truth, but I think for an academia, a lot of it is written for more conversation.
Yes.
And so a lot of things that are written and published, that's only as much research and interpretation that they've done. And new people should be coming in to reinterpret or
Yes.
deepen the research.
Yes.
So there's just so much more to be done, I feel.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, I think in the community, like, there's so much more to understand, like, about colonialism, like how it
No, it's
shaped
true.
us,
Yeah.
what we've done today, like even lasting impact of colonialism, right? Like in Laos, when you go, they still drink coffee, serve you bread. Some of the roads are labeled in French, you know,
Because these are all very like French
Yeah.
things. Like
go to
the
Vientiane,
banh mi, for example,
you go to
is a
Vien-
French influence.
Yeah, you go to
food.
Vientiane, and there's the Arc de Triomphe that copies
Right.
the one
Yeah.
in France, you know,
Yes.
and they call that.
Yes.
I forgot what they call it. What do they call it? The Arc de Triomphe there?
I don't know what it's called, but I know
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but-
it's in Vientiane.
So, you know, we're wrapping up this discussion, right? So why is it important to understand colonialism, and why is it important to decolonize our mind? I think, it comes with perspective and power, right? Power plays an important part when people, and power can be interpreted a different way, right? You understand that people with power shape history, people with power shape movements, people with power re-identifies and direct energy, redirect movements. And, I think for Hmong people, it's time for us to understand or try to create power, not see it from the lens of, colonialism. Like you said, many of the academic works, even though they're written by Western, liberal, progressive academia, and you're Hmong, you still read it and you still feel offended. Some reason, somehow, right?
Well, I mean, I feel like just to add to that, we ourselves are like guilty of kind of continuing on these sorts of positions. I'm using fancy words like positionalities in our writing, like in Hmong studies today. Like, I continue to see it. So I mean, that's why it's important too. Is like we have to kind of reinterpret how we're looking at ourselves and understanding ourselves.
But there are great Hmong works out there. Like, you just go to hmongstudies.org.
Yeah.
There's so much content out there that needs to be read, needs to be publicized, and needs to be understand within the Hmong community. Like, we literally have a hmongstudies.org that publishes research and writing every year, and like I don't think it gets enough highlights. I think it was in a YouTube video.
I think like
the
Hmong community is just like the general community. Like the general public does not go onto journals and read like research and stuff. Even like some of the historical events that we've talked about today, like Paj Cai Rebellion, I feel like the majority of the Hmong community doesn't even really know what that is.
Yeah.
Here, not just here, but also abroad, because it's not like kids in Vietnam or Laos are getting Hmong History 101 in classroom settings.
Well, I think in Laos they do study the Pach Cai Rebellion.
That's good.
But you realize this.
Okay.
The Pach Cai
positioned a certain way, or
the Pach Cai Rebellion is positioned in Laos as anti-West, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism.
Interesting.
See, but then you gotta understand that the Hmong in the West, we are the Hmong in the West. We don't talk about the Pach Cai Rebellion because we're the ones who sided with the French. I don't know.
So that comes back to just like the way that we interpret history, really. Right? Like, and okay, I mean that's interesting.
Yeah. So in conclusion, like that's what we learn at. Like, and sometimes you think about it, you get confused, and you're like, that's what we're about because we are pro-West, we're not pro-colonialism. Like we, and it's just something that we just have to. It's our history. It's tragic. It's we're on both sides, and that's something we could talk about too. Like, we only talk about Pach Cai, but we didn't talk about like General Vang Pao and the war, the secret war, all that. Like, it all plays a part. Certain parts of like we're in different sides of history, I guess, and that really does shape who we are. But I think it's about time that that's about the refugees, right? That's how we shed our refugee stories. Is we got to understand perspective of how to advance the Hmong community within the 21st century, right? And I think that's how I frame a lot of the work I do for the community is how do I improve our community so we are positioned to succeed within the 21st century the best we can. I'm not looking at like, we go a certain way or we support a certain way. I think it's how do you position our community, right? Through academia, through political advocacy, through community work, through cultural work. How do we position ourselves to succeed in the 21st century and work with other people, work with other communities, other races? Because, we need to catch up. We need to do that. And, there's a lot of good work that's being done in the community and, more discussion that needs to be talked about. And then by discussing these, I think we understand perspectives, right? Every perspective is from different angles, and I think the more diverse perspective we have, then we are able to fully rationalize and understand certain problems within the community. Thank you for tuning in. Hmong-ish is a podcast produced by Hmong American Media, located in Sacramento, California. We're sponsored by Hmong Organization for Progress and Empowerment, known as the Hope Center, and Culture Through Cloth. Thank you for joining us.
See you next time.